Are you serious? Are you serious? Folks, the United Nations is preparing to build a military peacekeeping base on the top of Mount Hermon, right where it's believed that Lucifer and his fallen angels landed on the earth so many thousands of years ago. Why in the world would you build a military base there? It's Mount Hermon, of course, is in Israel near Caesarea Philippi, and would be in the buffer zone in this peace covenant, or this covenant with many, that the Israeli nation of Israel and the new nation of Palestine, this would be a buffer zone between them, so that keep the borders separate, keep the peacekeepers by putting in troops in between them. And there would be a UN military base setting on top of Mount Hermon. Well, what does that matter? It means a lot, significantly and spiritually. Let me tell you why spiritually. Today, my guest on my live broadcast is Lynn Lees. Now, Lynn Lees is a writer for Before It Is News, and she also has written a novel, and she writes for other publications. She has covered this United Nations situation and how it relates actually, potentially, spiritually to the end times. She wrote an article back on January the 5th. I'll put the link below. It's titled Holy Land's Mount Hermon, a United Nations base built to deliver the Antichrist and open the gates of hell. And you can't argue with it when you start to take a look at historically and biblically the things that's happened there. Now, for instance, the area right there at Mount Hermon, there's a cave that opened up. There's a cave there, and it's referred to as the gates of hell. Back in the days of Caesarea Philippi, which stood in a very lush area near the foot of Mount Hermon, there was a city. This city was dominated by immoral activities, sexual practices, and pagan worship. Caesarea Philippi stood only 25 miles from the religious communities of Galilee, but the city's religious practices were vastly different from those of the nearby Jewish towns. In Old Testament times, the northeastern area of Israel became a center for Baal worship, and in nearby city of Dan, Israelite King Jeroboam built the high place that angered God and eventually led to the Israelites to worship false god. If you remember, the king Jeroboam was a wicked king, and forsaking the fountains of the Lord, he began to worship and get involved in Baal worship. He's not the only king that ever did that. We know King Ahab did it with his queen Jezebel and others. This angered the Lord. They began to also, King Jeroboam also worshiped the gods of Baal, and also replaced with other gods and false worship. Now, eventually, the worshiping of Baal was replaced by the worship of a Greek fertility god named Pan. That's the half-man, half-goat god that you may know about. Now, Caesarea Philippi, which stood in a lush area near the foot of Mount Hermon, became the religious center for the worship of the Greek god Pan, as the Greeks made their way to Caesarea. They went on top Mount Hermon and replaced Baal worship with Pan worship, and even changed the name of the city there to Panis in his honor. Years later, when the Romans conquered the territory, it was King Herod Philip who rebuilt the city and named it after himself. But Caesarea Philippi continued to focus on the worship of Greek gods. And in the cliff that stood above the city, the local people would build shrines and temples to Pan. Now, interestingly, when Jesus Christ came along and was preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, he actually took the disciples to the gates of hell. He actually went to Mount Hermon, stood right by the cave of the gates of hell there at the foot of the mount, and began to ask them some questions. he began to ask them, "Who do men say that I am?" They were standing near the pagan temples of the Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asked the disciples. Imagine this. He didn't go to the sanctuary he didn't go in the temple in Jerusalem and say, "Who do men say that I am?" He went and stood next to the pagan temples of Caesarea Philippi and asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And Peter boldly replied, "You are the Son of the living God. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God," it says in the King James Version. And the disciples were probably stirred by this contrast between Jesus and the true living God and the false hopes of pagans who trusted in dead gods. Sure, they heard all of that going on around them all the time. But Jesus continues, said, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Now he tells us this in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 20. It's a powerful time. He says, "Blessed are you," because he said, "Flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you, Simon, but this has been revealed to you of my Father." Now, today, Lynn Lees will be our guest. Don't miss the broadcast, of course. It's from 12 noon to 3 p.m. Eastern. Why in the world, if you knew this is where it's believed Satan and the fallen angels fell, you knew that Baal worship was done there in a big way, sacrificing of children. You also know that the worship of Pan went on there by the Greeks, and the Greek god Pan by the people who lived in Israel, and sexual encounters and orgies of every type went on there in those caves and around the altars and around the temple of Pan. Why in the world would the United Nations decide this is where they'd like to build a military base? You do the math. Is the New World Order rising? And is there wickedness? Is the Antichrist preparing to rise? I'm not saying flip a switch that it's here tomorrow, but I'm telling you, the tracks are being laid. The beast is ready to roll down the track. We're getting closer in these end times. So Lynn Lees will be my guest today from 12 noon to 3 p.m. Eastern. It's at my website, www.paulbegleyprophecy.com. That's www.paulbegleyprophecy.com. Also on livestream.com, just look up Paul Begley, or newlivestream.com, look up Paul Begley, or Roku satellite television. If you go to the new Livestream channel, just type in Paul Begley, or go to Blog Talk Radio on Coming Apocalypse, or if you're not home, you're driving a semi-truck, or you're at the office, listen on your cell phone. Just dial this number, 347-324-5208. That's 347-324-5208. Do not miss this show. We're going to storm the gates of hell and the New World Order. I'll be right back.